semester, and some prerequisites to this workshop was like having Unity downloaded on their device. But if you don't have it, that's okay. You can just like follow what I'm doing on the screen and download Unity later. Okay. So before we begin, can I get a quick show of hands of how many people know what a game engine is? Would any of you like to tell me what it is? It's okay. What, if you're not sure, like, what do you think it could be?
I would say it's more of a simulator. I would say it's more of like a way to simulate physics. It's an interesting kind of physics simulator. Physics simulator.
Anyone else? Okay. We can move on.
I mean, it's a good question. I forgot.
Okay. So basically, you sum it up. A game engine is like some type of software development environment where you can games, but as well as more than that. You can use a game engine to develop graphics, display actual physics in a virtual simulation, incorporate audio, networks, and create graphical user interfaces, as well as use scripts to create behaviors in the world that you create or objects in those worlds. So, if are some of you familiar with popular game engines, or are there any game engines that you know of? Yes.
Unity and FX.
Yeah. There's also Unreal Engine, but today's workshop is about Unity. How many of you have heard of Unity before this? I'm assuming, like, if you downloaded it, you probably know what it is. Okay. Do any of you know why Unity is so popular?
It's free, kind of.
Yeah.
I think because of good community support as well for people that are new to it. There's a lot of resources to kind of get into it as well. I'd say it's it uses C#, which is pretty okay.
Yeah. Unity is the world's leading platform for real-time content creation. Like some of you said, it's very friendly, easy to use. There's a lot of documentation for Unity as well. And like, unlike other game engines, I don't think like Unity will like destroy your computer like when you're trying to use it. And I think as students, we get a free Unity package, and you can download that later after this workshop. Come to open lab hours and ask any one of our mentors to help you and get down to using Unity. So, do any of you know like any games that you can use that's use Unity to create any of your games? Or is there like any games like any of you like playing that's been developed by a game engine?
Half-Life Alex.
Yeah, go ahead.
I disagree with it. If it's just Pokemon Go was created in Unity.
Awesome. Yes, Pokemon Go. Actually, I'm talking about that too. But beyond games, there are other things you can do with Unity. One of them being like enhancing films, adding special effects, being able to develop architecture, and being able to assist Fall Guys, Cuphead, Genshin Impact. That game's pretty popular right now, and Pokemon Go, like you just said. As you may have noticed, like some of these games have been developed onto different platforms and have multiple platforms. With Unity, you can develop for multiple platforms, and this is by no means an exhaustive list. You can see platforms such as iOS, Android, and Oculus, and other things that you can develop Unity with. So now we know what a game engine is and our basics intro to Unity. Let's talk about using Unity. And as we have mentioned earlier, Unity is a prerequisite for this workshop, but you don't necessarily need to have it. But any one of our mentors here would be willing to help you to download it during lab hours. And so let's talk about our Unity Hub, which I am on right now. Our Unity Hub lets us manage all the projects we have and will create. It also allows you to work with tutorials that Unity does create. And there are other things you can do in your Unity Hub. You can use it to learn resources by looking at the Learn tab over here, where there are various articles you can use to inspire you to create anything you would like to. And we also have a community tab over here, which basically acts like a forum where you can like ask or answer any questions that you may have. Okay, so now on to versioning. You will see here that I have like various versions of Unity installed. And this is like the basic format for versioning like major, minor, and bug fixes. A major change is deployed like every year, and it's not typically backwards compatible with other versions of Unity. So, and what that means is like if you created a project and using a version of Unity made in 2019, you probably couldn't use it with version of Unity in 2022. Could break your project or make things go wrong. Next, we have the minor changes, which will change functionality but not in a detrimental way, will destroy your projects. And lastly are the bug fixes, which is like patching minor details of Unity. And in these installs, you can click over here in the settings button to add support for any platform you would like to go for, like iOS and Android. I already have that installed. Just like a bit of a heads up, these do take like forever to install when you do so. Okay, now Unity supports tech releases and long-term support. A little birdie once told me that tech releases and long-term support, LTS, can be compared to like relationships and marriages. Say your tech release is like your boyfriend. This is a very unstable relationship, but at moments it can be very exciting. You had this experience when you were young and dumb. It's typically supported until the next tech release, and you could be in a relationship once or twice a year and release twice a year. LTS is typically more stable, as you would hope for in a marriage, and it's typically supported for 2 years and released once a year. Okay, now we're going to talk about navigating Unity, but before I do that, I have a project open, but if you do want to create your own project or you need help to do so, in the Unity Hub, at the top right, there's an option to create inside projects, an option to create a new project over here, and you can click 3D core and just select create project. I'm not going to be doing that. I'm just going to be using a project that I created earlier. Okay, so here's like just a bit of like some of the things I will be talking about today. I'll be going over them in a little bit more detail later, but here's just an overview. The first thing we'll be talking about is a toolbar. And if you can notice, like up here, if my screen's not hiding, there are things, I'm not signed in right now, but over here you would typically, I'll just go back. You would typically see your account over there with with options to edit your account and do other sorts of stuff related to that. Next to that is the Unity Cloud, where you can create builds on various Unity servers. And next to that, we have the Plastics SCM, which is basically Unity's own version control system, but people normally use Git. That's probably better and easier to understand. Over here, we have the play button and the pause button, which helps you switch from your scene view and your game view, which we'll talk about in more detail later. And say you add something to your scene that you do not want there. Like, I move this over here. You can just press Control Z to undo that change. And over here we have the search button, which you can search for anything in the project. Assets, prefabs, which we will also get into later. And over here, we won't get into too much detail, but layers that allow you to separate different parts of your scene from other parts of the scene in Unity and different scripts. And here we're in the normal default layout that you get in when you open Unity, but there are several others to explore if you would like to do that now or after. But I will be on the default layout for this tutorial. Okay, now let's get into the status bar, which is at the bottom of the screen. I'm not sure if you guys can really see that, but at the edge, it shows the most recent message in the console. For now, for me, that's a null reference exception. Object reference is not set to ensure it's an object, which is not really important right now. When you see messages in console, they'll either be like warnings or errors. You can ignore warnings. It's just like letting you know, like, you should probably pay attention to this. And warnings typically come in yellow, and errors come in red, which you typically can't ignore. And here you have the option to enable the debugger in Unity at the bottom. I'm not sure if you guys can see that. I do have it enabled, but you can switch to turning that off or turning that on. And here you also see tasks run in the background in the status bar. Okay, now let's go to our project window. Our project window is basically where the tools we need for our scene and our project are, the assets, prefabs, and other stuff. It's also connected to our file directory. So if I show in Finder, you can see it's basically the same here as you would see over there. Okay, so let's talk about our scene view. Our scene view is, which I'm in right now, it allows us to create the world that we want to build, whether it's for a game or an animation. You can place like game objects into your scene, manipulate the positions, like move things around and look at things from different perspectives and angles. Over here on the top right, we have this perspective gizmo, which will shift your scene into the perspective of correlating to each axis, like the X and Y and Z axis of your Unity scene. Yeah. So try playing around with that. There are also other things you can move inside the Unity scene. You can pan moving by clicking and dragging this scene around. We can zoom in and
Think you're in
huh?
think you're in orthogonal view.
Oh,
Click on the gizmo
uh,
in the middle.
we can zoom in and out. We can rotate the camera around the current pivot point. We can move using the WASD and the arrow keys. And if I wanted to like focus on this object in the scene, I would just click. I would just select it and press that, and I'm just like zooming on that. Okay. Alright. So now let's go into the game view. This is the perspective of the player or the user. You will notice like in my game view, it's like tinted purple, just so I know that I'm in a different view than the scene view. And in the game view, you can make changes to your scene. They just won't save to your scene view. So like if you wanted to like see how things would change by like moving this car around or like moving the little slime ball around, you could do that. But if you weren't like married to it and just like wanted to try it around and play around in this view, that's something you could do as well. Okay, let's exit. Oh, and if you wanted to edit your tint, you can go in preferences. No, sorry. You can go in preferences and click on colors and change the play mode to any color you would like to. Okay. Now let's get into the hierarchy. The hierarchy, if you look to your left over here, it displays like all the objects in the scene. And when thinking about hierarchy, we have like a parent and a child, and inside the parent there are various children. I know like I assume all of you have parents and you like moved away from your parents, like you're in college now, but like the children in the Unity hierarchy live inside their parents. So like take this car for example. It has parts of it like the wheels and the top of the car that make the car, but the parts of it are its children. And you can easily add objects to your scene and put it in the hierarchy. You can create a sphere and it shows up here in the hierarchy. And in the hierarchy, you can also put scenes and other scenes. It can get like Inception heavy. Moving on to the inspector menu, over here, you can display properties of game objects and assets, like their components, and you can use it to transform the objects in the scene. This is just like one of many ways to do that, using the inspector menu, like over here, we can rotate this object like into the other side of the plane, or change the position over here and just like exit off the plane. There, okay. There are other ways that you can mess with the scene using the QWERTY hotkeys. Q using to move around the scene. Q using to view the scene. W to move around the scene. When you click on an object and press E, you can see this rotate ball that allows you to rotate the game object from different axes, and R to scale this tool, like move it up or move it to the side, and transform like you saw in the inspector view to move this object across the plane. Okay, so you may have noticed that I have some cool assets here, like a tree and a slime ball and this material I put onto a plane. And I got them from the Unity Asset Store, which you can get them there too. You can access that by going to the Asset Store from Unity here by clicking on your window tab. It's typically recommended that you just use it from online. I do have it open up. Here's the Unity Asset Store website. You can search for any assets you like. Some of them do cost money, but if you are like me, a student on a budget, there are options to get assets for free by just adding the filter. And when you go back to your scene in Unity, you can go to the package manager to import the assets that you want to use in your project. Here is a asset that I just recently got, and I can just download that into the Unity project here. Okay, but it's not important. And moving on into the package manager. The package manager is a container that stores various features and assets. Let's open that up again. Okay. And in the package manager, you can access things like your assets, tools to use in your Unity project, such as AR Foundation, AI, or any other tools that you would like to support your project. Thing about the package manager, it's connected to the manifest.json file that we saw in our directory here. Basically, you can add like anything here and it will appear in your project. This is often ways we use this to add new releases that like haven't been released yet, but if you want to play with them, you can add them to the manifest.json file. Okay, now getting into the 3 levels of Unity. First we have our scene, which I would describe like a set in like a movie or a TV show where you can place objects in that tells like a particular part of the story in that scene. And within that scene we have game objects, and game objects have components that describe the behavior of the game object, but they're really nothing on their own. And components are basically what brings the color to the game object. Okay, the game objects are described to be the building blocks that you're seeing that composes things and objects. And as I mentioned earlier, the game object on its own, it's really nothing. Like for everyone here, like in comp sci, like you've seen like a variable and you created a variable that like could be initialized to be null or none or just an empty string, which basically means nothing. But when we add the component, it just gives the behavior or the action or meaning to that game object. So I'm going to go and add in an empty game object. You can see like basically nothing. It does have like the transform bubble thing, but it doesn't really have anything to do. You can't do anything with this, but you can move it, you can rotate it, but you can't really see what you're rotating. I think a clear way of showing you like you can't really do anything without components is if you like remove the light in here. If you delete the light, I'll do this from the game view just so I don't have to say this. If you delete light and you're seeing everything, like you can't see anything anymore, or delete camera, you have nothing to render and your player has nothing to see. And Jason will take over for the rest of our tutorial today.
Alright, yeah, so before I continue, does anyone have any questions about what Alan has? Yeah.
Would it be safe to say that game objects are kind of like a container for all the stuff in our scene?
Exactly, right? And so with that said, game objects are basically nothing without the components themselves. Like for example, if I click on this main camera right here, and you look at the inspector window, the main camera has a camera component, right? And the camera component is right here. Without the camera component, this would be completely nothing. This is what I was trying to show before. Let me get this out of this. Right, without the camera component, and I go to game mode, right? Turn it on, turn it off, turn it on, turn it off, right? And so I could make and that's where the flexibility Unity comes in. I can make a empty game object, and every game object always starts with a transform, and the transform component basically tells you the rotation, the position, the scale. Component. And then I add a camera component to this, right? This becomes a camera, right? Yep, this becomes a camera. And yeah, there's a lot of different things like this. There. I think you switched slides. It was this, yeah. Okay. So there is a component that you really can't see in Unity. It's called the renderer component. And it's kind of, you can't see multiple parts of it as a part of your Unity scene. So for example, if you guys do have Unity up, I really recommend that you guys play around with this. Let me see how I make a cube, right? Right, this cube has a material, and what the material is it basically just defines the surface of the mesh of the cube, right? How it looks like. So if I were to right-click into my project window, and I were to make a new material, right? I can make a new material right here. I can change the color of it, make it metallic, make it shiny. And then I can either, and this goes to show how every one of the windows is connected, I can move it and put it on my cube, right? Or if I didn't want to do that, I can move it and put it on the cube through the inspector. And now the cube has that red material, right, which defines like the surface of it. I can, and once I change the material in the project window, it will also change any object that has that same material. So for example, here I'm changing the color, and it goes way beyond color. If I were just to search up for a grass texture, right? Save this. Let's just easily. This is downloads, right?
Yeah.
Boom. And
And to clarify, these materials would be components of that game object.
yeah, materials aren't exactly components. They are part of a component, which I'll get into a little bit later. But they're not components themselves, but they do define like the surface of the mesh. Where is your downloads?
It's so weird.
Yeah, I got you. There it is. Where is?
It should be towards the top. What's it?
Oh, is that it? Okay, that's a weird format. Hold on. Let me find a better. I just want an image.
Actually have a project today.
Is there an image? Oh, 2D. Okay, and then. Okay, perfect. I import this texture. If I were to click on this this plane that Doug has put in the scene, it already has a texture in it, right? It has if you put it on the Alt Depot right here, this is the texture it has. If I were to change it, right, now it has the texture I have. So again, materials define the surface, and then you have kind of the next two parts of the trio. You have the mesh filter, and then you have the mesh renderer, right? And so what the mesh filter does, this is another component that a lot of these game objects have, is the mesh filter defines the shape of an object. And this goes back to the idea that game objects don't really mean anything. So this sphere that I have right here isn't really a sphere. If I were to change the mesh filter to be a flower, it becomes a flower. If I were to change the mesh filter to be a tree, it becomes a tree, right? The mesh filter defines the shape of the mesh. And the mesh renderer is actually what combines the material and the filter to give you the whole look. And as you can see here in the mesh renderer, it has a reference to the material. That's like right here, so break number 7. If I were to remove this, it disappears, right? And it also has a reference. It's automatically connected to the mesh filter. And so those are two important components. Just so you guys can see that there. And then there's the idea of prefabs. Actually, before I move on, does anyone have any questions about components, game objects, anything else? Okay, there is the idea of prefabs. As you guys know, if you're really like making a game and you're really obsessed about it, it can get really big really quickly, right? And so if you were to have 1,000 different objects in your scene, and suddenly you and they're about the same object, right? Let's say you have a bunch of different trees, but suddenly you want to change the scale of them. What would you have to do, right? What would you have to do? It's like, yeah.
Like individually resize them.
Exactly, right? And that's going to take a lot of time, and time that you probably do not have. And so that's where prefabs come in. Prefabs are kind of like blueprints that you're able to put in your scene, that if you were to change it, it changes all of them, right? And you can tell if a prefab is prefab by the fact that it's blue. Does anyone know what prefab actually stands for? I just found this out. It stands for something, yeah. Yeah. give me a guess.
I don't know.
No, that's not idea. Yeah.
Prefabricated?
Yes, prefabricated. Yeah, it blew my mind. But yeah, to make a prefab, all you have to do is take the game object you have in your scene, and then make it, and then put it in your scene view, right? I mean, put it in your project window. And now if I were to drag this back in, it is now a prefab, and I can just drag a bunch of different prefabs in. And if I were to change the prefab, like for example, now look at what I'm doing here. I have it selected in the project window. I have the prefab selected in the project window. If I were to scale it, like this X, oh yeah, okay, it's just slow. But if I were to scale by a large amount, like 10, they all scale, right? So you can quickly change it, quickly change the color, stuff like that. So that's the idea of a prefab. There, does anyone have any questions about that? Yes.
You unlink a prefab from its like files.
Yes, you can. The way you do that is simply by right-clicking on it, and then there is a prefab option, and you can click unpack, right? And so that would unpack it. If you want, you can create variants of prefabs, different things. Like, say for example, you have a car game, and you have various cars, right? You want just a different type of car with different colors, stuff like that. Yeah, it goes beyond that. And then there is the idea of a collider. Now, before I even define what a collider is, do any of you guys have, like, what is a collider? What comes up in your head when you think of collider, right? Collision. Colliding on not a rhetorical question. I'm gonna start selecting on people. Okay, you. Yes, you.
Think when something that brings two things together.
Yeah, and that's exactly it, right? A collision is an event when two meshes touch with each other, right? It's a physics event. And so this goes again back to the idea that game objects are really nothing without their components, right? Unity, you can have a sphere collider, and I guess a good example of this, I'm gonna delete all of these spheres that look like trees. Right? So for like let's say I make this sphere, right? Alright, I made a cube, but I made a cube. And I'll take out the mesh renderer. You can see this little green outline here. This is the collider of the object. This is actually what the text when it intersects with something. And based off that, you can do a certain collision event, or like Quinn said in the beginning, you can simulate physics. Collisions aren't actually what actually simulate physics. Like for example, if I were to click play right now, let me turn on the mesh again, what would happen?
It wouldn't do anything, it'd stay there.
It would stay there, right? Because colliders aren't actually the component that simulates physics. Unity has a component for that, and that is called a rigid body, right? A rigid body is how you simulate physics in Unity. You can simulate gravity, mass, collision detection. So let's look at it, right? If I press play right here, right, you see my cube just standing right there. If I were to press play and add a rigid body to this cube, right, a rigid body has a use gravity property, right? So I just press play, boom, right, it falls down, right? If I were to press play and I remove the collider, what would happen?
Fall into
It would fall through the plane, right? Because the collider is
The anticipation.
the collider is what decides the physics event there. And just to showcase this a little bit more, I'm gonna make another plane, right? I'm gonna make another plane, and I'm going to rotate this plane. Again, there's various tools to manipulate a game object. You could just think WER. E is to rotate it, right? I'm going to, I hope I'm not hiding the camera. Okay, can't see it, hold on. Do you know how to align the camera to view again?
Oh, you're talking about isometric view?
No. Like aligning the camera to your main view, your scene view, without manipulating it. There's a button for it.
On the main.
Oh, I see it.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. Okay. Yes.
You said E was rotate?
Huh? E is rotate. W.
So
Yeah.
what does R do?
R is scale. I know that's not intuitive. now I'm thinking about it, but that's just how it is, and you can't complain. Luke does. What me and Luke's conversation does bring a great point. If you want to align the camera's perspective to what you're seeing in the scene view, because it's easier to eliminate, to move, then you can just click. What did I click? Okay, you can click game object and then align with view. There, and then let me just manipulate this. Right, and let me move this game object up. Right. If I were to change the collider from this, right now it has a box collider, right? I can change the collider to a sphere collider. Right, and I'll make this the sphere collider very, very big so that you guys get the perspective. What would happen?
We would roll on the plane, assuming the plane has a collider on it.
Exactly, yeah, the plane does have, by default, the plane, any of the primitive objects do have a collider on them. It would roll off of it because it's not the mesh that decides the physics of it, right? It's the actual collider there, which again goes back to the point that if it didn't have any of these, it wouldn't do anything, right? So yeah,
if you move this around, I'm not sure if there's a way to do.
so I'll put this great video here. I don't know if any of you guys played The Last of Us. It's actually a really good game. Right? You can actually do a bunch of rope physics in Unity. I've never played around with it.
They use this in the TV show?
I never watched. They have a TV. I didn't even know they had a TV.
They
show.
do have it.
It's a telltale series.
Is it new?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So.
Oh, yeah, so if you have this plane, one thing you can do.
Right, so that is the power of physics. Even though I don't like the class, it's a pretty cool subject.
Right. So there's one way to. There's one thing I want to tell you about. So
He's just gonna keep on pulling the rope.
Right. So it didn't save yourself. Okay. So now you're set at 0, 0, 0. Go to your plane.
Okay, this is fun. I'm gonna.
Same thing. Yeah. Okay. Now go back to your plane. So you reset it to 0, 0, 0. Once or one down. Right. What's the rotation that you need? What do you think the rotation?
And then we have user interfaces, right? And so user interfaces is how you would display information to whoever you're building, whatever you're building for. And so Unity has 3 UI systems. It has the UI toolkit, which is based off, which they build it based off the standard web technologies, CSS, HTML, so on and so forth. You have the regular one that people use, right, which is a Unity UI package, which is game object based, right? You can actually add a UI object, a canvas object into your scene, which I'll show you guys later. And then you have OmGUI, which is usually used because Unity is such a flexible software. You can make your own windows, right? You can make your own buttons and stuff, and that's why OmGUI is there for the people who are really, like, oh, they wanna completely make this their own. They can completely change the Unity environment to suit their needs. And so that's what it is. We're gonna focus on the Unity UI package because it's more familiar to what we've already talked about. Do any of you guys have any questions so far? Nothing. So the first, like the big thing in Unity UI, the tool. If you go to UI, you want to make a canvas, right? And so a canvas is basically what it sounds like. It's where all of your UI objects are going to be held. And by default, it is screen space. So what that means is that the user will always see it. If I go to game view, wait, let me just, right? This is my canvas, right? Now, it has a canvas component. So what does a canvas component do, guys? What would happen if I didn't have the canvas component?
I wouldn't be able to see text, scroll
Yeah.
bar, image.
Yeah, the
toggle,
UI would not work at all. And so,
I would have to be able to see.
yeah, that's the main thing. And then you can add various UI components into it. So for example, if I were to add this toggle, right, zoom in, I have a toggle in the middle, right? And if I go to my game view, I have this toggle right here. I press play. I can turn this toggle on and I can turn this toggle on and off. Right? Same thing with text. Same thing with various images. Right? So you can build out the UI that you want in your game. There. Input field.
You could say create 3D object, right? You can say 3D object, or
Right.
whatever you want. Do lights, you can add that, audio.
And then I press play.
And give a cylinder, right? So wherever you want.
Right? I can type in my name. Right?
That's your name?
It's French. Okay.
Man, that's a complicated WPA 128 password.
Right, and so to manipulate UI, just like all the other game objects have their manipulation tools, there is actually one other manipulation tool. If you go to scene view, it's called the rec transform, and I think it's the fourth one, right? If you see it right there, rec transform. You click on it, you can move your various UI, you can scale it to whatever you need. You can actually change game objects around with rec transform. I don't know anyone who does that. Maybe that's the move. But let's see. You can manipulate game objects with rec transform. It seems pretty intuitive. I don't do it, but maybe I'll see why not. But yeah, that is an option. Does anyone have any questions about what I've done so far?
Actually, about the rigid body.
Yeah.
I know it simulates physics, but like, is there a concept of like center of mass and everything? Or no?
Yes. Wait.
The center of mass is the origin.
It's all
You can change it, can you? You can change it?
You can change the origin of the object.
Yeah.
Because like right now, it's like the rectangle is not really the center of the sphere. So if you like sort of flash down, you sort of expect it to rotate.
Yeah, but that would all be based off the collider then. So
The center of mass is the origin of the object.
it's the origin of the collider.
Well, I'm gonna.
Yeah. I mean, just to say that it's not the origin of the mesh itself, but the collider. Like, so the mesh, what we do with the mesh doesn't matter. But
Collider center, I think it's
Within this boundary, right,
Yeah.
this comes down to the color.
yeah. Any other questions?
Now, people don't use the collider.
If you don't set the center mass from the script, you calculate on that.
Okay. And now I'll talk about Raycast. So Raycast is basically an invisible line that you will send out. And if it reaches another game object, then it'll give you an event like, oh, I hit this, I hit this. Give me a real use case for a Raycast. Like, what would you use a Raycast for?
Like how Endermans work in Minecraft.
How do you? I'm sorry, this might be a
She's right.
but I don't play Minecraft enough to know. So explain that to me.
Like if you look at an Enderman, it comes out to you.
Actually, exactly, right? So it detects, oh, this is the player. Okay, let me do this, right? You detect the behavior. Anything else? Well, yeah.
Maybe a car across rough terrain.
Yeah. Actually, yeah, perfect. And this goes back to what my example. I was gonna say, going upstairs, right? If you want your player to go upstairs, right? You detect, oh, there's a stair in the way. Let's just elevate his foot a little bit, have that animation trigger, so on and so forth, right? One more. You get one more. Yeah. Wait,
He's right.
explain that for me.
The boom sticks.
Oh, okay. Guns. Yeah, that's actually most to go to. Instead of sending out projectiles through your guns, which can be very resource expensive, you just sent out a raycast, right? It's an invisible line, and then when it hits the enemy, particle effect, right? Instantly, right? And then they lose health there. So that is the use case of a raycast. If you want to learn how to implement a raycast, Unity has a bunch of, and I'll talk about scripting, but just segue here. Unity raycast, just so you guys see this code.
Hold on.
Right, this is the Unity documentation where, if you ever get stuck on anything, this can help you. It has code examples. Where it defines the raycast hit, and then it sends out the raycast. And this is the physics out raycast. It tells you the origin of the raycast and the direction that the raycast is going, right? And if it hits something, so that's why it's in the if statement. If the raycast hits something, it debugs that log did hit, right? So if you want to play around with this code, I'll definitely recommend you implement it. Right, and then there are particle systems, which I talked a little bit about, where particle systems are basically tiny meshes that you want to if you want to simulate a specific effect. For example, to make a particle system, right? You can just go to Effects, Particle System, right? And it makes this particle system right here. If I go here, it has this is one of the bigger components that you will see in Unity. You see components are really in depth, right? This is the particle system component. Here I can change the color, right? I can change the let's see which one we'll make this more fun. Let me change the max particle to, let me add a 0 on this. No, okay, max particle might not be the one. Let me see how would I add? Let me add this. Let's say 5. Add the start size to 5. Right, and so you can see they have various different properties that you can change for the particle. You can change the color over time through your script, so on and so forth. And so you can, so whatever, other than don't cheat, other than the use cases I said down below, what's another way you can use a particle system, right?
To make it look like fire.
Yeah, wait, I said fire.
Oh.
I said, you're right though. You're right. You would say something?
Oh, you can also do hair with it.
Hair. Oh, that actually, yeah, you're right. I never understood how people did that.
Have you never watched a Pixar movie?
I've watched them. I never understood
You forgot about Monsters, Inc.?
I haven't gotten that into hair business. I don't have any.
That's fine. I'm joking. I joke.
Yeah, so these are particle systems. Anyone have any questions on particle systems? Again, this workshop is just so you guys get comfortable with, like, you know, it might seem like a lot, and so we just want you guys to get comfortable with the interface, saying, okay, just the basic idea, so you guys can explore some more when you get the chance. And now let's talk about coding. And so Unity supports C#, right? The C# coding language, and it supports these 3 editors: Visual Studios Code, and JetBrains Writer. It does not support Visual Studios Code out the box, right? You have to configure it a little bit. So I just use Visual Studios. But to make a script in Unity, you just do create. And before I even make a script, I have one. We talked about the various components, and there is truly a lot of them. There is like this light component. There's an audio component for your audio. So how much components do you think Unity has? Like, give me a number. Give me a guess. Huh?
2,000.
Nah. We need more. How much components do you think Unity has? Is this just a guessing number? A million. All right. This was kind of. I know this is kind of like a trick question, but the real answer is an unlimited amount, because that is what scripts are. Scripts are you making your own custom component, right? Matter of fact, any of the Unity components that you see here are just scripts that Unity engineers made for you, right? So they're just pieces of code. And so you can make your own script. Matter of fact, to really just show this, if I just click add component and I say my script, it's gonna say new script, right? So you're adding that script to this game object, and then create an add, right? And then I can open this, right? And this is how a script looks like. I love the color scheme, Don. It's pretty. So let's talk about this. So C#. How many of you guys? What are your majors? CS. Communications. All right. So you can, if you guys have taken the beginner CS courses, C# is very, very similar to Java, right? And so I mean, I'm not going to get too much into the C# concepts, but I'll get into the Unity concepts with C#. Starting with like the basic anatomy of a Unity script. So you are using the Unity engine library, which gives you access to Unity API, and every Unity script by default is going to inherit from mono behavior, right? Which allows you to use Unity specific functions and events, right? For example, the two that they give you straight off the bat is the start function and the update function. What does the start function do?
Me?
Yes.
Start.
You're making a game, right? What do you think? What do you think Mario, like? We all know Mario here, right? What do you think Mario would constantly be? Just gonna load as I change the script. Now you notice here I had put the script on this game object, on this cylinder. Where is the cylinder? Right? Knowing what we said about what start and update happened. What happened? This is not a trick question. What's getting? Yes, start will be in the console. How many times? Once, right? What would happen with the update? It would constantly be called, right? And let's just see that right here. Right? We can't even see the start anymore. The update just is taking over. If you want to collapse this, right? You see the start was called one frame. The update is still being called, right? Like let's just if we let's see. No, I don't want to open your Discord. Okay. No, no Discord. Is enabled in your scene, right? It's always called. Matter